first 7 years of his life, Jay was subject to satanic ritual abuse in a large cult setting. Jay speaks on recovery and healing methods for satanic ritual abuse survivors. He discusses in detail neurological and biological discoveries related to ritual abuse and reveals a specialized holistic approach for SRA healing. Ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure and my honor, Jay Parker.
Thank you, Bob. Get the neck straight, you know. Right. Get back. All right, my talk today will be basically a little bit of religion, a little bit of science, and a little bit of government law. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I'm going to discuss Illuminati SRA abuse, but not today. I am going to touch on some things that deal with it, my talk on SRA, but today I'm going to do another talk just about the difference between what everybody thinks is true and what reality really is, according to me. So, there we have Jehovah, the patriarchal God of the Israelites. And I've been doing a lot of reading recently. I was a Christian for, I would say 35 years. I went to a Catholic school, even though my family was a Protestant family. So I got a good, well-rounded upbringing as far as the standard Judeo-Christian American religion. All I can say is it's fear-based for the most part. There are some people who teach aspects of the Judeo-Christian Bible, and they base it more on forgiveness and love. But deep down inside, there's a fear of hell. And as long as you're in fear, you're not walking in love. And, I agree that a lot of people believe that, Jesus Christ's blood will wash away your sins, and once you're saved, you're always saved. And I'm okay with that attitude towards salvationism belief, but I have to firmly say that in my experience of 35 years as a Christian, I can count the real Christians I ran into on one hand, and I'm serious. Now, where did we get Jehovah? Where did European people living in America, a land that was stolen from the indigenous tribes, where did we end up getting a Jewish God as our patriarch of our spirituality? And what happened was, basically, it started about 3000 BC with Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism started the salvation ball rolling in the Western world. Once salvationism started, the indigenous people that had goddess theology based on nature, based on your life was meant to be an ever-increasing journey of knowledge, experience, and goodness. This was the basis of the mystery school tradition. The mystery school tradition, basically, probably 8000 BC to the time of Christ. Basically, the different saviors that they had, cults like Attis, Mithra. They would have libraries, they would have teachers teaching all kinds of arts as far as how to make a living as a carpenter, woodworker, philosophy, and basically, I'm going to change a little bit here. Okay, now this is very upsetting for me to talk about religion. Because of my SRA programming, I was programmed to be a Christian, okay? That was one of the things that they did to me. So for me to speak out against status quo Christianity, it's a little bit tough for me right now, but I'm going to get through this, okay? The Zoroastrianism salvationism that started in Persia, 3000 BC, featured duality. And duality is where your creator God not only does good, but he creates evil. He's completely 50-50. So it's kind of like a jack in a box. You never know he's going to come up out of the box with a treat or a trick. And that's no way to live. And so in the goddess theology of the Gnostics, they talk about the chief archon, the demiurge. And the demiurge, basically, what Jehovah has become, and it may not have started like this, but it certainly is this way now. Jehovah is the demiurge persona that the human race worships. And for those that are initiated into the Illuminati and dark occult secret societies, they don't worship the false image of their god. They worship the god itself, which is the demiurge. The chief archon is, basically a control freak, basically totally schizophrenic, totally insane. It's a spirit of just malignant spirit of evil. And the people that are into this are basically into it for the money. They're into it because of the satanic ritual abuse they went through, and then they become abusers themselves. When Christianity was first formed, and let me just talk about some things. I've been reading quite a few books about early church history recently. It's like this is probably, of all my studies to try to figure out who we are, where we came from, and how we got into this mess. This is probably the last thing I've really approached to try to figure out. And basically, I've read several books that have given me insight, but for the first 300 years after Christ's death, Christianity really wasn't known in Europe or in the Middle East that much. There were a lot of Gnostics at that time, and they had their small temples would be centers of learning, where the Gnostic Telestai taught people philosophy, math, science, just everything. The libraries were there at the temples, and they were the centers of literacy in the classical world. Now, when the Zoroaster Jewish movement got rolling, basically they had in Judaism several cults. And of course you've heard of the Pharisees, the Sadducees. The cult that was the most zealot the cult that was the most radical, hating of anyone that didn't believe the way they believed was the Satanic. And the Satanic basically saw an opportunity with Christianity to take their theology and inject it into the new religion of Christianity. And so basically that's what happened. But essentially, I'm going to get rolling in a minute here. Essentially, this is Europe at 800 AD. This is the time of Charlemagne, the king of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, before this, there was a Council of Nicaea with the Emperor Constantine. That was in 325 AD. Constantine was a sun worshiper. Sol Invictus, the undiminished light, or whatever they want to say. But Constantine became a Christian. And then he had a council of church leaders at Nicaea in 325 AD. At this council, Constantine ordered the formation of what we call the Old and New Testament, or the Word of God. This is a political emperor, a military man, and also a mass murderer. He could not get the cult of Mithra or other cults, religions of the day, to back him because he had murdered so many people, especially relatives of his. A power-hungry man, so he found that Christianity would work with him. When they got together at Nicaea, they threw out 35 books that were in the new religion. They just tossed them in the trash and said they were forgeries, they were pious, fraud, and they were not the Word of God. So Constantine and his scribes put together what we know basically as the New and Old Testament in the Christian world today. When the Council of Nicaea was over, Constantine said anyone in his empire that did not believe this doctrine would be cut off at the shoulders. So this is a huge difference between the classical world of the Gnostic cults like Attis, Mithra, where people would go and become initiates of their basic religion, to having a government-sponsored religion that would kill you if you did not obey. Never before in the history of the known history of the human race did we have a situation where the government was backing one particular religious ideology and killing anyone that had a divergent opinion. And all I can say is what it did to go from the classical Gnostic religions that basically taught about the different hemispheres of the brain, how to balance the left and right side of your brain, how to be both feminine and masculine, to have literacy and knowledge of many different aspects of nature, politics, the world, so that you were a complete human being and you could achieve your highest good. And when the Christians came in to power with Constantine, they went on a rampage. And that rampage lasted, I would say, as far as a bloody rampage, up until maybe the last century. I mean, ask the American Indians how they feel about Christians. Okay? And I know this is really tough for me to speak out against this, but I have to say something, because what the church has become now and what it was meant to be, I mean, it's just night and day, and I have to say something about this. So I'm going to say. The death of Hypatia Hypatia was a Gnostic teacher in Alexandria, Egypt, in 415 AD. She was murdered by a mob of Christians. Not only did they murder her because she wasn't a believer in their church, they then, after they tortured and killed her in the street, they then ran to the sea and got seashells and stripped the flesh off of her bones. All I have to say is, having seen for myself the abuse of corpses by dark occultists and the joy they take in that, you've got to have some satanic energy in you. If you get a kick out of stripping the flesh off of a corpse with a sharp seashell, you gotta be twisted. And what I'm trying to say is, you need to take a step back and see the early history of this church, okay? Because I know Christians, and I believe in myself that, I consider myself, if I had an ideology, I would say it's the Spirit of Christ. But the religion that's out there today, I don't know, well, I do know. It loves war, it loves money, and there's no mercy in it. So, anyway, the library at Alexandria gets torched by Christians. That library contained the entire knowledge of the Western world. They had spent centuries collecting books and scrolls, and it probably set the world back 1,000 years. So, in the classical world, there were like 16 crucified saviors. And Percy Graves wrote a book about it. And you can know about all the different cults. And the cults that were, like Mithra, Attis, they died and they rose again, and it was a very popular way to get someone to understand that the way is wide open for you to grow spiritually, because you had a Savior that had paid any cost for your transgressions. So it's a great way to say, oh, okay, I can go up to God, to the Godhead, and because, I'm healed and I'm clean. The mystery schools taught, as I said, probably from 8,000 BC to probably a couple hundred AD. Once the Council of Nicaea and Constantine formed the Catholic Church, all the old cults like Attis and Mithra were sacked, and the people either obeyed Christianity or were put to death. Another book this book by Percy Graves is fascinating because you're going to see that the story of Christ is repeated over and over again in these previous 16 saviors. And then the Christ Conspiracy, this book deals with the early church history and letters of different church fathers in the first 200-300 years of the church. A staggering book, because we all think that, of course, Christianity is the only way and everything else was nonsense before. But the opposite might be true. Joseph Farrell and Scott DeHart have written a book, Yahweh, the Two-Faced God, and it deals with the fact that you're dealing with a duality God. And what this does to you psychologically, dealing with the duality God, and not many Christians even know that in the Bible, in many places, Jehovah says, if there's evil, I did it. Basically. And which, shocks the crap out of most people. They go, huh? I don't believe that. Well, read your Bible. You'll find it. So, really have enough time here. These are pictures of Adolf Hitler and German Nazis. And they're doing the Satanic. Okay? Now the thing is, the Lutheran Church was one of the biggest churches in Nazi Germany. And mostly a Protestant and Catholic mix, probably 50-50. But the thing is, both the Catholics and the Protestants went hog wild for Adolf Hitler. There were pastors that would say, you know, the word of Adolf Hitler is the word of God. And the quotes are available, and you can look these up on the web. And Adolf Hitler signed a concordance with the Catholic Church in Rome in the 30s. And they were buddies. Adolf Hitler praised the Catholic Church for teaching him how to control the masses. Because once your spirituality, your church, forms a partnership with the government and the oligarchs, then basically they're just working together to get whatever they can out of it. It's not about enlightenment. We tolerate no one in our ranks who attacks the ideas of Christianity. Our movement is Christian. Adolf Hitler, October 27th, 1928. Now this is Molech. And what they used to do in the ancient Canaanite worship of Molech is, you see on the bull figure there and the fire underneath, they have compartments, and in those compartments you would place human beings, especially children. And you would do this to appease Molech. In America today, once a year, all the richest people, the most powerful politicians, go to a redwood forest in Northern California called Bohemian Grove. And in front of an owl that represents Molech, they do a mock human sacrifice. Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter. The list is endless. But just check into Bohemian Grove and ask yourself, what are the most powerful, richest politicians and business people doing, celebrating a festival in front of an infanticide idol? You know, what's going on with that? It's because they're the same people from the ancient world. These families that have lots of money, it just goes on and on and on. So, this book, along with The Christ Conspiracy, 16 Crucified Saviors, Two-Faced God, this book here is by John Lamb Lash, not in his image. Many people talk about the ancient mystery schools as if they were attached to dark occultists. The ancient mystery schools were not attached to dark occultists. The ancient mystery schools were the libraries and teaching facilities of the classical world, and for probably 8,000 to 10,000 years kept Western society on a somewhat peaceful, even keel. And it was they tried to produce a gigantic society where it was both the females and the males had equality, not like, you know, the Christian society where women cannot be priests and things like that, and the pay's not the same, and it goes on and on and on. Not in His Image is probably one of my top 5 books that I've ever read. And the reason is that it teaches the true classical history of the mystery schools, and it teaches what the Gnostics really were doing. Because the largest enemy of Christianity was the Gnostic Church, because the Gnostics taught people about human psychology and taught people about the predator-victim bonding that goes on when you put yourself under authority. So the Gnostics had to go in order to create a better fascist Marxist world for you to enjoy. So the deep ecology and epigenetic nature of the human race and what was being shared in the ancient mystery schools, John Lash talks about quite a bit. The book is one of the best books I've ever read in my life. Absolutely. Now I'm going to get into things that don't upset me emotionally. Because religion does. Just, I don't know why. Makes me want to run somewhere. Okay. One of the things I love that's going on in the world right now is the fact that we have a technological world and we're discovering things about our reality every day that are just mind-blowing. And so Universe Solved is a physicist who's got this website, and he's written a book, and basically he goes out to say, you know, you think it's all real, but you're actually in a giant computer. You're in a holographic universe. And not only that, I just want to say, this holographic universe that you're in runs on consciousness. It runs on what you're doing right here and manifesting out here. So until the human race starts to elevate itself emotionally and spiritually and start to get knowledge again, instead of just being a herd that follows what's on TV, we're going to have a rough time here on the planet. But Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot is a great book. I got to tell this one story. This hypnotist is in a room at a party, and he's invited there to do a little entertainment. So what he did was he got a man who had a daughter there, and he sat him down and he said to the man, I'm going to hypnotize you so you can't see your daughter. And so he puts him under hypnosis, and then he brings the daughter back to stand right in front of the man. And the man is asked the question, do you see your daughter? And he says, no. Then he takes a watch with an inscription on it and puts it in the small of the back of the girl standing in front of this man. And he says to the man, can you read the inscription on the watch I'm holding in my hand? And he says, yes. And he read the inscription. Now, how can that happen? Well, it can happen if basically this reality is only in your mind. And if you read Holographic Universe and take a look at the Universe Solved, you'll be on your way to starting to figure out one of the things the Illuminati teach. They're adepts. When I was a child, I was taught this was a holodeck. In fact, it was 3 giant blue pyramids. They bounced me out in a ritual where I actually got outside the computer that we're in. And it's a big computer. 3 equilateral blue pyramids, probably 350 feet high. And when you stand there and look at it, of course it's just your spirit standing there looking at it, you can feel the malevolent, like demiurge watcher's energy over the scene. And quite staggering. So, one of the great things that's going on as we start to get into a point of high technology, Nassim Haramein is a physicist that has figured out exactly what is the basic fundamental unit of our reality in this place. And it's a 64-grid tetrahedron. When Nassim Haramein did a scaling of large to small, infinitely large and infinitely small, the thing that came up in the middle of the scale was the human being. And that's because we're at the fulcrum point and we're the ones this place was created for, and we make the decisions. about how this is going to go. So, it's all in your head. But Thunderbolts of the Gods is a website and it's a movie, and they also teach the electric universe. One of the things that I want to say is, we're taught that there's an atomic sun and it runs on helium-3. The actual truth is it's an electric sun, and everything is plasma out there. So, Thunderbolts of the Gods, it is an amazing tale and an amazing movie about the previous solar system that we had. The solar system that we see in ancient writings and carvings, and we say, gee, that's really weird planetary makeup there. But Thunderbolts of the Gods shows you the ancient cliff drawings and things like that, and petrographs, and you can actually see what those people were trying to communicate to you. They were actually seeing massive plasma discharges in the sky. The Mars came very close to the Earth. Just amazing shift of where our solar system orbits, planetary orbits are, from what they were back, I don't know when this actually happened. I would guess it was one of the cataclysms after 10,000 BC, which was a major flood at 9600 BC, written about by Allen and Delaire. But in Thunderbolts, you can see the way the ancient solar system was made up. The reason I'm mentioning this right now is people believe, oh, everything's been this way, it's going to stay this way. Don't bet on it. The more study I do on land masses, we've had we've had continent, when you hear about Atlantis sinking into the ocean, okay, that's an everyday event on this planet. I mean, if we get 20,000 years where stuff's not flying through the air the size of Manhattan, we're doing good, But Thunderbolts of the God is really an amazing thing, because it talks about the cataclysmic change of our solar system. And I just want to mention that the Gnostics, in John Lash's book, Not in His Image, and also the Nag Hammadi and stuff, the Gnostics were the only religion I've ever heard of, and the goddess theology, that talk about in their doctrine, in their theology, of the solar system collapsing and having to be reformed. Just something to think about. Just like when my mother was looking at the moon one day, she said to my father, she mentioned the Dakini, which is part of the goddess religion. And she said to my father, I'm thinking of studying up on the Dakini. And my father said, that's Kali. She'll kill us. And it's just interesting that Kali was the only thing in religion that my father ever showed any fear of. So, just interesting. So, Kali and mass murdering pedophiles obviously don't get along together. So, and we talk about Linda Taggart and the field is that we all broadcast. We all broadcast and we all receive energy, and we're all our minds, all our consciousnesses are connected in one giant field. And it's hard to believe, but you've heard people say the Akashic record and all that stuff. We're knitted together and we're under an illusion of separateness. But we're all just drops of the same ocean as far as I'm concerned. We need to start treating each other like that. It's a great book to feel. And Morphic Resonance, Rupert Sheldrake, one of my favorite guys. he has written several books about how this entire place that we're in, this entire ecosystem, communicates with each other through morphic resonance and morphic fields. And he's done a lot of experiments in this, and he's just written a new book, and it's called Science Set Free, where he gets into just, you know, what I wanted to try to talk about is that everything in our scientific field today is backwards and upside down. It's just like, you know, why don't we have Tesla-free energy? I mean, everybody knew about it back in the 30s, and yet it was suppressed. You know, they made cannabis oil, you know, 96% and higher tetrahydrocannabinol oil illegal. Well, recently people have discovered, like Rick Simpson, that cannabis oil cures cancer. And he hasn't found a person yet that hasn't gotten a remission from cancer by taking 96% pure cannabis oil. And there's a lot of stuff in medicine that's it's the opposite of what we need to do. I mean, how are you going to heal somebody by shooting them full of deadly radiation? We need to get back to nature. But What to Believe That We Know is another book that I like, and I teach people to look at this, is that one of the things in What to Believe That We Know is 1,200 Eastern meditators, some Buddhists, some other you know, flavor of Eastern philosophy, went to Washington, D.C. for 3 months, 1,200 meditators. And they meditated peace and tranquility for 3 months. The violent crime rate in Washington, D.C. dropped 25% that summer. And this is back when Washington, D.C. was the gangbang capital of the world. So when you think that, well, what I think and what I feel and what I'm broadcasting emotionally and spiritually is not affecting anyone else, ask yourself, what happened there? How could 1,200 monks calm down a city of a million people to where the violent crime rate dropped 25%? It's because if we learn to raise our vibration, it's going to start affecting the negative vibration producers. And then slowly but surely we're going to get back to a more humane society. But it's for us who know and who are on the center path to be neither an abuser nor a victim, but to take the center path of knowledge and to teach and then try to grow a new society that's based on basically freedom and equality. You know? Now, you know, our government says all men are created equal. Well, you just look out your door, you know that's not true. But what they should be equal in is their rights before the law. You know, everybody's not equal. We all have different talents and different abilities. And this is a strange thing to say. We should be equal under the law. Bruce Lipton is one of my favorite people, and he's a microbiologist. And he took his entire microbiology career and put it on 10 hours of tape. And it's called The Wisdom of Yourself. And I personally think it's one of the best things I've ever listened to in my life. It really talks to you about the first 6 years of your life, how you're in a hypnagogic trance. When you're in a hypnagogic trance as a human being, all you do is download information. You don't judge. You just take it all in. So it's not until you get a bump up in your brainwave pattern when you're about 6 years old that you really start to differentiate and critically think for yourself. By that time, your entire subconscious has been built. That subconscious hard drive runs 99% of your actions. Your conscious thought, your day-to-day thought, does not run your life. Your subconscious runs your life. That's why in every totalitarian society, they want to destroy the family and get to the children as soon as they can so that they can be brainwashed to love Big Daddy and to love the state. Who doesn't love the state? They're really trying hard. Yeah, to create more wars, to blow more people up. You know, it's ridiculous. And another guy, Lloyd Pye, I like to mention is Everything You Know Is Wrong. It's a book about human genetics and where we came from. Because in your biology class going to school, you always see the monkey, to the chimpanzee, to the Neanderthal, to the Cro-Magnon, and then bam, there's us. Well, Lloyd Pye will teach you that that's completely not true, and also give you the science for it. He'll also talk about the hominins, the primitive race of the earth. They're known as Bigfoot. What's really strange is Lloyd Pye, in one of his YouTubes, mentions that this guy shot a Bigfoot and he toured around the country with it in a block of ice. I remember being at the Delaware State Fair. I guess in the 60s, and me and my friend actually seeing that Bigfoot. And it was so weird because you could see a little bit of blood coming up from his body that had been frozen. And we were looking at it and we're going like, look at the hairs on this guy. I mean, how could you make a model like that? It was so good. It was the Bigfoot that Lloyd Pye talks about. And, you know, it's a real thing. So, in my truth versus illusion, I got to get more into the government here. We all believe in our society, the majority believes, that it's fair and just for the government to give us an income tax. The truth of the matter is, we didn't get an income tax in America until 1913 because it was unconstitutional. They passed the 16th Amendment, supposedly to give themselves the power to tax income, but in fact, there are 4 Supreme Court rulings shooting down the 16th Amendment, saying it gives the government no new taxing ability. So all the income tax that's been paid in America from 1913 to now is stolen money. It's criminal, it's unconstitutional, the law that never was. They ran around and they collected the actual vote tallies of the 16th Amendment. And they found that they not only did the 16th Amendment get shot down 4 times by the Supreme Court, but the law that never was shows you that the federal government forged the tally of the state House votes to get the constitutional amendment passed. So the whole thing is fraud based upon fraud. It's a double fraud. A lot of people think that the Constitution of America, you know, really benefits the little guy, and it's one of the best constitutions in the world. I would say yes and no to this. The Constitution of the United States is set up so that as things got rolling and the government got bigger and stuff, that eventually the oligarchy would maintain and keep control. So one of the best books on the Constitution Because people think, oh, if we only had the Constitution enforced, everything would be great. Well, it's not the best that we could have done for ourselves. And if you read economic interpretation of the Constitution, you'll see that there are some major flaws that are really hurting people. Now, a lot of people think banks are here to serve us and serve the community, and hi, I'm your banker and I'm here to help. You know, well, the thing is, the history of banking goes back a long time. And we're wondering, where do we get the class of elite people that have been ruling this world for the last 4,000 years? And in Babylon Banksters, a book by Joseph Farrell, one of the best authors you'll ever run across, Joseph B. Farrell. Definitely check him out. His work on the Nazis, is just incredible, incredible writer. But Joseph Farrell wrote, I believe he has 2 Babylon Bankster books out now, but I've read the first one, mind-blowing. And one of the things that I just want to say is, what they did in, let's say, 3000 BC, in the Near East, silver was considered as gold. And in the Mediterranean, the West, gold was the #1 element. They would take ships back and forth at a ratio of 50 to 1. They would go back and forth between the East and the Mediterranean, and you would get a 50 to 1 hit, okay? So, they kept doing that for a couple thousand years, the oligarchs. And nobody really knows about this. But if you have a business shipment of precious metal, and every time you go back and forth, you're timesing it 50%. You know, it's 50 times what you had before. So, after a couple of trips, you're getting pretty rich, you know. But that's what they did for a couple thousand years, and that formed the core of the oligarchy that rules the world. Because it's all about money here. It's all about money. And I just put the Titanic here, and people think that the Titanic was just a mishap, iceberg mishap. But if you really do research, it really certainly looks like it was an Illuminati mind control job on the Captain Smith. All the bankers, Anglo-American bankers that were against the formation of the Federal Reserve in America were on that ship, all the big ones, Guggenheim and some others, and they all perished. You know? So it's a good way to get rid of the people that don't want to do business with you. So Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and Wall Street and the rise of Hitler. Both World War I and World War II were Illuminati banker-created events. When Archduke Ferdinand got assassinated to start, supposedly in Sarajevo, to start World War I believe the King of Sweden also got assassinated that very same day. And I believe the Prime Minister of Spain got assassinated that day. And everybody knows from the story of Archduke Ferdinand getting assassinated that it was done by secret society Black Hand operatives. The reason I bring up Wall Street and the Bolsheviks and Wall Street and Hitler, 2 great books by Anthony Sutton, a Yale scholar. And one of the things we need to understand is it's because of the money shipments that happened 1000 BC. There formed a class of people that were so wealthy they could buy nations. And they've been in power since then. It's generation after generation. And All I have to say is both these books prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the bankers set up communism and they set up Hitler. And most people, you know, they go, why would bankers want to set up communism? Because the communists have a central bank. When you compare the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, they're almost identical. And people go, well, that's impossible. One's leftist and the other one's hardcore right-wing. They both have a central bank. They both have dictatorship. They both have a suppressed press. They both mind control and indoctrinate their population. There's no difference. None. But the media wants you to believe there's a difference. So a lot of people believe that it's bizarro fanatics running around with bombs that are causing the terror in the world today and in the past. Alex Jones is a radio host from Texas, and he has a website called Infowars.com, and he's produced a couple of films that I think everybody in America should see. Terror Storm is a film he did basically about false flag terrorism. A lot of people don't remember this, but I'm old enough to remember. There was a bombing in Bologna, Italy, back in the late 70s. 283 people died in that bombing. It was right before an Italian election. The media blamed some red brigade, some communist brigade, and the entire population got irate at the communists, who were just about to win the election. So the election went to the vote swung to the right, and the communists did not win the election. 20 years later, the former president of Italy was speaking, and he said, well, it wasn't the Red Brigade that did that bombing. It was actually NATO. Nobody's ever been prosecuted for that bombing. I don't know why, since people are openly talking about the fact that NATO, slaughtered 283 people at a train station. I'm sure the people that did it are still alive. But Terror Storm has a bunch of things like that in it. And the whole NATO bombing spree in Italy at that time was done by a NATO faction, a NATO group called Operation Gladiator. And then, of course, Alex Jones has the movie Endgame. A lot of people believe that the UN is your friend. That the UN is here to promote peace and harmony between all nations and peoples. The UN was built by the bankers, is owned by the bankers, and works for the bankers. It's not your friend, and all I gotta say is, Endgame is something you have to see. Endgame. It's basically what's happening to the entire world. And as I said, Agenda 21 is something you need to Google and search, because the map of America basically is totally changed, and there's no inhabitation allowed north of New York City. New England is totally rewilded, and they're talking about doing this in like 20 years. So you need to look at the map of Agenda 21. And of course, I'm not going to end on a bad note. The Secret Life of Plants came out back in the 70s. It was by author Peter Tompkins, former MI5 man who worked for MI5 in World War II. Tompkins wrote The Secret Life of Plants. You've all heard of this. that they put electrodes up to a plant and they got a reaction to the plant. The Secret Life of Plants, that's only the beginning of the research that they uncovered in this book. This book's 40 years old. I just read it a month ago, and it blew my mind. And I know about Tesla technology. I know about a lot of stuff, and this book just rocks the house. So definitely get Secret Life of Plants. And he also did another book. And Secret Life of Plants talks about suppression of true biology and true botany. It's amazing how the Illuminati oligarchs are keeping the lid down on our evolution. We are the only chance for the human race to start learning and teaching and then making wisdom popular again, you know.
Excellent presentation by our good friend Jay Parker. How about one more round of applause?
The worst speech I gave you.
Okay, everyone, welcome early arrivers to day 3 of the Free Your Mind 2 conference here in Philadelphia. Today's preliminary presenter is one of the core organizers and co-hosts of the Free Your Mind 2 conference. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Mr. Jay Parker.
I want to thank whatonearthishappening.com, Mark Passa's website, for putting on this conference. There is a wealth of information at whatonearthishappening.com. There are over 100 podcasts, an infinite source, literally, of materials so that you can free your mind and so that you can really get a hold of your life and get out of the matrix and form your own living connection to the universe. It's really a great website. He's a great guy, and he's tough at times, but he's only telling the truth. So today you're in for a treat, because I'm going to really lay down how I grew up, where I grew up, and who I dealt with. So it's Ritual Abuse 101. I just want to say, as I woke up back in 1999, I was triggered by a witch that I was dating, and she used the primary mind control code word that my mother used on me. When this woman accidentally said that word to me in a rather intimate setting, all my memories from my early childhood satanic abuse started pouring into my mind. It was a weekend that I'll never forget in my life, because one of the things I remember was my father ejaculating in my face when I was in the crib. And that weekend, I took a Scotch-Brite scrubbing pad and I scrubbed my face until it bled. That's about the size of the emotional intensity of satanic ritual abuse. You'll literally take a Scotch-Brite to your body until you bleed. All I have to say is, later in this presentation, I'm going to give the layout of what I grew up in honor of the friends I grew up with that the cult killed. I'm doing this for them. I'm doing it for you, and let the chips fall where they may. Bloodlines of the Illuminati by Fritz Ringmeyer is absolutely, to my knowledge of the international dark occult conspiracy to rule the world, totally dead on. My parents were associated, especially my mother, with the DuPont family. I grew up in Delaware, in a small Illuminati town, village of Arden. The village of Arden is about 300 houses. It's a a very secluded community. 90% of the people there are pedophile Satanists. They practice annual human sacrifice, and I'll get into exactly what they do later on. But I just want to say that as I grew up in Arden, 90% of the kids I went to the Arden school with were being subjected to ritual, trauma, and abuse. And sometimes we talk about it, and sometimes we wouldn't. But when I get into my personal story later, I'll fill in the blanks there. I just want to say, if you really want to get a handle on what's going on geopolitically and who's really calling the shots in this world, you have to look beyond the facade that television is giving you and start looking at the oligarch power structure that has been passed down from Europe. And when you do that, Bloodlines of the Illuminati is the first place you need to go. Now, when I woke up in 1999, one of the first books I ran into, and it was Synchromysticism. I got a new computer, and just for a lark, the guy who set up my computer put on a bunch of occult books and so I say fringe books onto my computer. And one of the books was How to Create an Illuminati Slave, Total Mind Control Slave by Fritz Springmeier. And it was amazing to me that I'm reading this book and the memories I had of being mocked, buried alive, of having my heart ripped out in a ritual and given to the Temple of Molech. Now, when you're on drugs and you're 4 years old and someone is using hypnotism and the power of suggestion that's been worked out for thousands of years in these trauma-based systems, you really think they're taking your heart out and putting it in the Temple of Molech. And it ain't pretty and it ain't fun. And that's all they do. They just abuse, abuse, abuse. But How to Create an Illuminati, Mind Control Slave, this book, is probably the #1 best book on satanic ritual abuse. What really goes on. I went through one of the things that they talk about in the book. There was a girl taken from Long Beach, California, driven all the way across the United States to Arden. She was kept in the trunk of Bernie Brockman's car. She was brought out of the trunk of Bernie Brockman's car, taken to Buzz Ware's gallery, which behind Buzz Ware's gallery was the Satanic Center, the Satanic Church. And what they did that night to that girl, she was about probably 15 years old. They axe murdered her, and then they brought me out of a trance, and everyone in the room said, "Look at what you did." The shock and the horror of that experience, I actually had an out-of-body moment where I could actually see myself totally going ballistic, freaking out at the gore that I saw. And I still think of that girl in the trunk, because when Bernie Brockman opened the trunk and my parents were there and I was standing there, and she was wrapped in a woolen blanket, and she got up and she was obviously drugged. And she looked at me and she looked at my parents and she knew she was dead. Transformation of America is absolutely dead on. And I've said this in my earlier Free Your Mind presentation. Transformation of America deals with the truth about who's in political power that engages in monarch and ritual abuse and all this stuff. The drug dealing, the torture, the murder. It's all there, and every person that, like most of the people that are mentioned in Transformation of America, Senator Byrd from West Virginia, Clinton, the Bushes. My parents, when some of these older illuminists were mentioned back in the 60s and 70s, my parents would manifest like, yes, they're on the winning team. Well, they're not going to be winning for too long. I'm just saying that the universe is going to give the Illuminati an answer, because the originator of life has had it with this. And I'm not sure who's calling the shots, but I can tell you one thing. This problem is being worked on, and right now, the Illuminati is going to see a massive, massive blowback from the abuse that they're doing to this planet and to the people of this planet. So get ready, suckers, because here it comes. One of the best documents you can ever read, books you can ever read, is Access Denied. The story of Kathy and Mark Phillips and their dealings with the government over the satanic abuse and the things that are going on in this country. They are classified whistleblowers because what they were involved in, of course, was a government program. And all I can say is, you want an education on the way the government really works? Read Kathy O'Brien's books, read Fritz Springmeier's books. And you're going to change your paradigm about what this really is. Ted Gunderson, after he retired from the FBI, ended up getting involved in the McMartin preschool case. Gunderson's stuff, I hope, is still on the web dealing with McMartin. But in the McMartin case, the prosecutors in Southern California absolutely covered up the traumatic ritual abuse of those children. It was a total snow job keeping the Illuminati pedophile ring that was operating there safe and sound. Franklin cover-up, again, another huge cover-up. There's a movie about the Franklin cover-up that you can see on the web. And basically, kids from Boys Town were flown into Washington, D.C. to be at GW, the older Bush, White House, and have nice pedophile parties. Wonderful stuff. There is a ritual abuse site where you can get ritual abuse newsletter, and it's Ritual Abuse USA. U.S. And the Smart News people have a convention in New Haven once a year, and psychologists and other overcomers of satanic ritual abuse give talks and lectures and talk about healing, and that's a place where you can go, and they have tapes and CDs from their conferences, and if you really want to start learning about this stuff, you can order some CDs and go to town. Now, one of the things I want to say is the FBI, of course, does not keep any records about how many children are missing in America. None whatsoever. Whether they're abducted or runaways, there are no missing kid records for the FBI, because the Illuminati doesn't want people to know what's really going on with the children. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that 800,000 children disappear in America each year. Now you can say, okay, half of them are runaways, bad families, gotta go. Okay, fine. So we've got 400,000 kids that are what? Going into pedophile slave rings? I mean, think about it. 800,000 a year disappear. And it's not a national disgrace? I don't know. Where are we? Is this hell? Well, some people want to make it hell. But what this place is a consciousness holodeck. And we all, as a species, create this reality. And until we get our heads out of the sand and into a species-based mentality, that we're all in this together, we're all the same consciousness, subjectively looking at this experience of life from an individual viewpoint. But once you get to a point with, and I have to say this, with, shall I say, patriarchal religions, where all of a sudden, now in the classical era, men and women were equal. Women were honored as the keepers of gnosis, the keepers of the knowledge of life, of herbs, of humanity, of feeling. And the men were the builders and the warriors. Okay? Now, when the change of Christianity happened, then all of a sudden women became the cause for all the evil in the world. And women became, as John Lennon says, the nigger of the world. Now, you can sit there and tell me that Christianity and Islam is not a misogynistic belief system. Well, all I have to say is, from my studies about what life is, and I'm talking about 14 years now of really reading a lot of books and studying, and if you have to study to get out of trauma-based mind control, let me tell you, people, I've had to do some studying, I've had to do some meditating. Wasn't easy. But I got my heart and my mind back, and I'm standing here today saying, this needs to be exposed. Each and every one of you need to get this out on the web. Because children are being abused. And your society is being destroyed by this. When these satanic communities, like Arden, Delaware, Rose Valley, Pennsylvania, two communities that were built and designed by the same architect in 1900. And a bunch of pedophiles came out of Philadelphia and formed a quote-unquote artist colony. Well, the art is the art of torture. This is a picture of Molech I have on the screen. And basically, my feelings about Molech is the chief archon. It's a symbol for the demiurge. Whether you believe in goddess theology or not, the only deity, the only religion my father ever stated that he had fear of was the goddess. Everything else, it was a joke to him, you know. Just mind control, just keeping the herd in line. That's all it was for. You know, if you have an emotional feeling from your religion, you feel happy, well, that's good. You have an emotional loop because you believe something. It doesn't necessarily mean you're on the path to enlightenment. It just means that you feel that you've got a ticket to heaven. Well, maybe you're not here just to sit on your ass and wait until you punch that ticket to heaven. Maybe you should be in society doing good. I mean, I just have to say that there's a lot of people on this planet that are just out for themselves. And as a species, we need to change that. We need to change it today. And when you study the dark side, and a lot of people in the New Age say, oh, I don't want to know about all the corruption and the killing and how bad this is, because I'll give it power if I think about this. I don't dwell on the darkness all the time. But I know about the darkness because I am a complete human being. I know, and this is right out of the Bible, you know, it says, Moses knew all the things of the Egyptians. And supposedly the Egyptians were some really nasty people. But he knew all their ways. Once you know about the corruption that's going on in this country and on this planet, and the Illuminati, UN, world government agenda, the New World Order. Once you know about this, you have two choices. Put your head in the sand or get up and fight. Because you're fighting for your species. These people mean to kill 80% of the human race and take the planet for their oligarch families. and they'll genetically re-engineer humanity to have a nice class of slave drones, knuckle draggers, crawling around, polishing their Mercedes-Benzes, forever. Yeah, great. So let me talk about Arden, and let me talk about how my family treated me when I was a child. One of the first things that I remember is being abused in the cradle. And Kathy O'Brien had this done to her too. This is a generational satanic thing. You attack the child as early and as hard as you can. And the reason you do that is in the first 6 years of your life, your subconscious is being programmed. Your life is run by your subconscious, not your conscious day-to-day thoughts. It's all in the hard drive you get in the first 6 years of your life. That's why EFT, Psych-K, and some of the other tapping modalities to change your subconscious are so critical to emotional health and also to, just stopping the habit patterns that you have that you don't like. You do stuff and you go, man, why do I always do that? Well, do some EFT, do some Psych-K, and you can change those patterns you don't like. EFT has been really excellent for me to get over the emotional trauma of the abuse I went through. Now, when I was a child, my father and mother would abuse me in the cradle, and my father would force me to fillet him while my mother was standing behind him. She would be manifesting the demiurge archonic energy of total malevolence and hate, while my father was in a sexual pleasure state. So you have these two totally opposite energies coming at you. Now, as a child in the cradle, I really didn't know what I was doing. But after my father would ejaculate in my face, then he would physically hurt me. Okay? So, one of the things the Illuminati like to do with their sexual abuse is they like sex is a natural part of being a human being. Love and sex go together, in a natural way. So, because this is archonic, they want to take anything that's good and wholesome in nature and totally pervert it and twist it. And they succeed. I mean, many of the people that go through satanic ritual abuse become homosexual. And I really have to say, you might be born into this world as a homosexual. That's fine, that's your business. But I generally have a feeling that many people that are homosexual in this world are that way because they were abused. And that's just my personal opinion. And, I think whatever you want to do sexually, I don't care. It's none of my business. Just leave the animals and the children alone, okay? Can you have that much decency? Obviously, in this world, no. So, when I was 3 years old, my family moved to the pedophile village of Arden, Delaware, a government-protected, mind-controlled village. The head of the town at that time, who was running the Church of the Marquis of Hell, Andres, was the deity that they worshiped. And it's a particularly bloody, dark, demonic entity. The Marquis of Hell supposedly has 40 legions of demons at his command. Big deal. So, Buzz Ware had a gallery underneath a theater that was in the town of Arden. And behind the theater, underneath the theater was his gallery where he sold art and crafts, and he would travel all around the world. And behind that was the Church of Satan. And when you walked in past this doorway with a big black curtain on it, there was a hole in the ground for the mock human burial. And that's where they take a child, 4 years old, stick them in a little coffin, lower them down, and they have someone in a Father God outfit, white flowing robes with a big book. And of course you're on drugs when they do it to you, so you're totally terrified. And the God comes out over the pit that you're being lowered into in this tight coffin, and says, "This is the book of life, and your name is not in it." And the reason I mention that one little satanic ritual that they do to their children to program them to think that God is not on their side is the whole programming is meant to get you to where all you have is the cult. The cult's the only thing you have. Society doesn't care about you. Look, we go to church, right? I would go to church. And then we would go to the real church every Sunday. We would go to church, the Presbyterian church, and then we would go to the Satanic church of Andres. And one time, all I have to say is, my parents were getting their hands shaken as they were leaving the church one day. And it's an interesting story. And the pastor shook my father's hand so enthusiastically and thanked him for coming, that when our family got into the car, my mother looked at my father and said, "Maybe we should have invited him to come with us, since they were such buddies." I mean, this pastor, and I'm saying I prayed my brains out for God to help me when I was in that church. And the answer was no. Think about yourself being a toddler, a small kid, 5 years old, being abused, tortured, electroshock all the time. I had a mole on my face from Buzz Ware hitting me with a cattle prod because he scared a girl that I was going to go through a ritual with, and she was frightened. And I ran out of the holding area that they kept us in, and I yelled at Buzz Ware and I said, "You're a bad man." And he picked up that cattle prod and he hit me in the face good. And I just want to say that a lot of people that have moles and marks on their face, I don't know the system behind it, but I believe the placement of those things are actually Illuminati code, so that you can know whether a person is a slave and what kind of slave they are and what hand signal it would take to trigger the programming. So interesting stuff. So I've gone through blood sacrifice ritual with the girl from Long Beach, California. I've gone through the Molech ritual of having the heart ripped out. I've gone through the mock human burial. And when I was about 6 years old, and I think 5 years old was when I really started to fight the powers that be there, as my consciousness started ramping up to another level. Because at 5 and 6, you get another brainwave pattern. But as I fought then, I asked my family to adopt me out. I said to my brothers and my mother and father, I said, "I won't talk about anything that's going on. I just want you to adopt me out. Say that you're both teachers, you don't have the money to send us all to college, and adopt me out." Well, they were like looking in shock at me for saying that. But that's the way I felt at that time. I just wanted to out. One morning after my father raped me, we were having breakfast in the kitchen, my two brothers, my mother and father. And I mentioned to my father I didn't appreciate what he did to me the night before. And then my brother John looked at me and said, "You're not supposed to talk about that." And the whole family got up and left the table. So I knew where I stood with my family, what side of the fence they were on. But when I was 6 years old, I had a best friend, and his name was Brandon Ploner, and he lived in Arden, and he was being ritually abused also. Brandon went to, they would have different nights, different cells of the Satanists. So you would have your own cell, and you would be abused with the same 4 or 5 kids all the time. Occasionally, a different child would come in, but most of the time they wanted to keep it compartmentalized so that you really didn't know who was getting it and who wasn't. So, long story short, my friend Brandon Ploner in 1st grade was raped so horrifically that they tore his colon. He went septic. In 3 days, he was dead. After the 2nd day of him being septic, the parents reached out to the cult for help to try to save the life of their child. They brought the town veterinarian, Bernie Brockman, there. So they sent a dog healer to help him. Well, Brockman couldn't do anything for him, and he died the next day. As my friend Brandon was dying, and I knew he was dying, I jumped out of the window of my parents' house, and I ran to Brandon's house as fast as I could. And I got there just in time to see Bernie Brockman putting Brandon's body in the trunk of his car, wrapped in a green tarp with brass eye hooks. I'll never forget Brandon. I'll never forget his brother, Brad, who came back to Arden 10 years later and started investigating the cult. Brad was murdered by being shot 13 times and having drugs thrown into his car. Of course, the 13 bullets in him was a little, "You know who did it, police, so shut up and take it." The police are completely under the power of the Illuminati in Delaware, as they are everywhere. You don't mess with people. They have billions and trillions of dollars. They have private armies. They have private assassins. They own the media. They control the banks, the government. If you mess with them, they will destroy your life. They will find a lone nutter to kill you in about this New York minute, okay? And the police know that. And there's nothing they can do about it. So when Brandon was killed by sepsis, I went to a Christian who lived down the street because Arden is not 100% pedophile Satanists. They always keep, my mother said at least 10% was non-believers in Modak because they needed a little flavor of normality. So there was a Christian family down the street, so I went to them because I knew my mother hated them. She hated anything decent. She was a really great woman. Loved torture though. Yeah, loved that. So I go down the street and I say to this man, "This is what's going on. My friend is dead. Can you help me?" So he goes to the police and he tells them the story I told him. And believe me, I told him details. Who was doing what and where the body might be, all that stuff. Everything I'd ever heard from my parents about the incident. He goes to the police and the police say, "Oh, we know what's going on in Arden, but we can't do anything about it. Better luck in the next life." I threw that. The reason why was in the 30s, the Delaware police tried to shut down the cult in Arden. 3 police were killed quickly. And then the cult said, "You want some more?" And the police said, "No, we're done." Now, in addition to my friend Brandon being killed, I'm sure every child that goes through a ritual satanic upbringing has at least one human sacrifice done in front of them, and they're blamed for it. That is standard monarch, generational Satanist practice. So if you've got, 300 people, how many bodies are in the woods of Arden? My mother said in 1963 that the woods of Arden were full of corpses. Full. And it's a pretty big wood. It's an Illuminati dumping ground, I guess, for the DuPont family. But when I got older, there was a guy who lived across the street from us. His name was Jackie Hawes. Jack Hawes went to the media after he grew up and was able, for the first time, to move away from home. He got an apartment, had a girlfriend, and he went to the newspapers and wanted to expose Arden. Jack Hawes didn't know that the media is completely controlled. So they've gone to the Satanists. They went to his apartment, knocked him on the head, set the place on fire, and Jack Hawes died of smoke inhalation. Jack Hawes' best friend in Arden was Peter Brocken. Peter Brocken was livid about the murder of Jack Hawes. Peter complained about it openly. I remember to this day, I can see Peter on the Arden Green with myself, my older brother Jamie, and Don Holcomb, complaining about the murder and the abuse of the Arden society. My brother and Don Holcomb looked at him and said, "You're not supposed to talk about that." Interesting thing to say. I was like, I wonder what's going on. When Peter kept protesting, of course, that got him in trouble. You're not allowed to say anything. 2 weeks later, Peter Brocken was found dead with a shotgun wound in his chest. He had killed himself in his parents' garage with a shotgun. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. It's a lie. Peter wanted to live. And he also wanted to do something about the pedophile Satanists that rule America and the world. So getting back to my wonderful story about the death of my best friend in first grade, Brandon Plummer. After the police said they could not help in the murder of that child, the Christian friend down the street was threatened by my father, Chuck Connor, and Frank Starr. That's who went over to his house and said, if you pursue this, as in trying to get justice for the death of that child, we will kill your child. And then, as that man went about his business, going to the hardware store, doing this and that, all the Satanists that were in that area, in that community, all made a point of saying to him, you better watch it. Wherever he went and ran into someone who was in the cult, they said, you better watch out. So when I went and talked to this man again, he was flipping out. It was like the police don't care, they're threatening my son, there's nothing I can do. And that's the way that stood. Then my parents took me to a CIA psychologist who would monitor all of the abuse in the area, a University of Pennsylvania child trauma specialist by the name of Gordon Pizer. And Pizer, Frank Starr, my mother and father, held me down to a chair while Gordon Pizer electroshocked my brain. And they kept asking me about Brandon's murder. And they kept ramping up the electricity in the shocking to try to use the electricity to take the memory of his death out of my mind. Well, eventually they got there. I suffered from petit mal seizures occasionally the rest of my life. And that's one of the reasons I didn't really wake up from the abuse for almost 40 years. My mother did a lot of mind control work for the cult. She was very close to Buzz Ware, who supposedly by the people in Arden were enamored of him because he could shapeshift into a reptilian. I have memories of being in the presence of a standard Draco reptilian, but whether it's under hypnotism or whether it was actually Buzz Ware, I don't know. But the story, as I grew up, was Buzz Ware wasn't human. What I want to say is, as I grew and lived after I was, basically my brain was wiped clean at the age of 6 years old. My parents could openly discuss any cult activity in front of me because it didn't matter. I was a zombie. So I saw a lot of cult stuff, and the cult people really didn't care what they said in front of me because they knew that I had my brain fried. So, you know, he's safe to talk in front of, he's a zombie. So my mother and father, my mother worked at the pilot school, an exclusive school for the elite's children, especially the DuPonts, the Carpenters, you know. The Carpenters that own the Phillies are DuPonts. It's just, you know, a different name to the same family. I just thought you might want to know that. That when you really look at the elite families, you can say Anderson Cooper, he's on CNN. He's a Vanderbilt. He's also a self-admitted CIA agent. But you can get good news from him. Trust him. You know, come on, people, wake up. Smell the coffee. Robert Kennedy had 4 bullets in his back. Sirhan never got closer to him than 4 feet in front of him. And yet Sirhan was the killer. Robert Kennedy, 4 bullets, entered from the back. And yet, the patsy in the front of him, you know, goes to jail. I mean, and you say, well, what can we do about it? I tell you what you can do about it. You can start telling people about this. You can start being an activist. You have to fight for your species. Because if you study Agenda 21, if you study the eugenics of the elite families, you're going to find out they want to kill 80% of the human race. You need to start studying this. You need to see Endgame, a film by Alex Jones. You need to see Terror Storm. These people are psychopaths. So let me get back to my mother at the pilot school. One of her students was a promising young heir to a fortune named Johnny DuPont. Johnny DuPont and my mother were fairly close friends. My mother got involved with some other DuPonts, I don't know who they were, but they hired my mother to take a satanic spinner device, and it's a high-speed, deep hypnosis device. And if you grow up in a satanic family and somebody shoots this right in your face, you're going to be under a deep hypnosis immediately, less than 5 seconds. So what happened was she was hired by some other people in the DuPont family to program John DuPont so that he would have a breakdown and that these other DuPont family members, I do not know who they are, could go into court and seize control of John DuPont's fortune. My mother said to my father at the time, and Buzz Ware approved this covert operation against John DuPont. That in 25 years, John DuPont will totally implode. That's when the program kicks in. Now, you have to know something about mind control when you can set a subliminal program to activate for 25 years. The Illuminati have studied human consciousness and psychology and physiology more than you have, and for thousands of years. That's why the government spends all their money studying how the brain works and how emotions work. That's why there's the wireless internet. They're tracking everything you do, every reaction from every false flag terror event. They're watching how you would react on the web. It's all about collecting information to make sure they build a perfect cage for you. Those of you that survive. There won't be too many. Trust me. They love to kill. It's a death cult. So, 25 years later, under the approval of Buzz Ware, my mother cooperated with the other DuPont families, mind-controlled John DuPont to implode, and 25 years after this time, and it was in the mid-60s, John DuPont went nuts, killed his wrestling coach friend, and ended up in Norristown State Mental Hospital for the rest of his life. During the trial, DuPont family members tried to seize control of John DuPont's fortune because of his mental instability. John DuPont, though, had good lawyers, and he kept control of his money. So the plot did not work. But a man lost his life, and another man lost his life and is now in a psychiatric institution because of mind control. You don't know how deeply someone can be mind controlled until you read Fritz Springmeier's book. But I'm telling you, they've been doing this for thousands of years and they are experts at it. And you can torture anything into anyone. Well, I just want to say it took me a long time to stand up here and honor my dead friends. Jack Hawes, Peter Brockman, Brandon Ploner, and Brad Ploner. But I thank God in the universe that I've been given this opportunity to shed some light on a very dark area of our world. Because if we do not do something about this, now, we are not going to survive as a species that has anything you'd want to call a life. The Illuminati through eugenics, and they're using the UN to do this, want to form a world government, a world currency. The plan is almost complete. We have trusted our government. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that with money, governments can be bought. With money, pastors can be bribed. The leaders of our society have turned their backs on us through fear and intimidation and bribery. And it's up to us to rebuild our society and reclaim our lives and our freedom. We're being poisoned in the food. We're being poisoned by the chemtrails. The fluoride in our drinking water is a #1 cancer causer. It's rat poison. Go buy a box of Decon rat poison. #1 ingredient, sodium fluoride. It's because they care about the rat's teeth. Right? You really need to get your head out of the sand because you're in danger. But you are infinite consciousness, And when you start to use your consciousness together as a species against this darkness, you will overcome it.